Hello, and welcome to this Let's Chat Scrambler. My name is Karen Emmons, and I'm a VASO board member, one of the technology event group leaders, and a national event supervisor. I'm joined tonight by Rosaline Lee and Ethan Gom. Give me a moment to spotlight us here. There we go. Rosaline is an alum from VASO and has been an ES for us for many, many years as a judge for the vehicle events. Also, I know that she did these events in high school. As the event supervisor this year for Scrambler, she will be addressing this year's rules tonight. Also, congratulations to her because she's just finished her master's degree. Yay, congratulations, Rosaline.
Thanks.
Ethan is a senior at UVA. He did SO in high school, doing the vehicle event all 4 years. He's bringing his expertise tonight in the building of the vehicles. In our time this evening, we cannot possibly cover every rule or situation in the rules or VASO clarifications. Nothing we say here today supersedes a rule or clarification. You will still need to read the rules. And please do that. I've kind of been hearing through the grapevine that people are using this as a substitute for reading the rules. Don't. Read the rules often, because every time you do, you'll see something else and then read them again. And don't forget about the VASO clarifications. On the website, we will look at those tonight. They're really important, and there are a lot of them in Scrambler. They are as binding as rules. As we get it going, I encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on them to make sure that they get asked. Again, thank you, Rosaline and Ethan. All right, let's start, Rosaline, with you. What is the task of Scrambler?
So this event's going to test the construction of a system called a scrambler, hence the name. This scrambler utilizes the energy from a falling mass to transport an egg on a straight track. The primary mission of the scrambler is to transport the egg as close to the target point on a solid barrier as possible without breaking the egg. The secondary mission of the system is speed. A portion of transporting the egg will be timed for this.
All right, there is a lot in that statement. So I think let's parse that. What is a scrambler?
So the scrambler is going to have two components. The first one is the vehicle, the egg transporter, and the second is an energy propulsion system. The two components may be two separate devices, or they might be combined into a single device.
Okay, so the transporter of the vehicle is probably some kind of car. The second, the energy propulsion system. And those together are what we refer to as the scrambler.
Correct. Yes. So the propulsion system can be a separate entity, and that's where your falling mass comes from. Or it could be combined onto the vehicle where the falling mass is on the vehicle. All
right. So let's talk more about the first component, the vehicle egg transporter. So tell me a little bit about the transporter.
So I'm going to start sharing my screen and show the Virginia Science Olympiad Scrambler page. This is a very important resource that all of the students should have access to. If you just Google Virginia Science Olympiad and the title of your event, Scrambler in this case, you will be able to pull this page up. So just going through the web page very quickly, you're going to see the name up here, Scrambler, and there's a rule book link on this location. So if you click on that, it will link you to the nationals page. So that will come in handy for all of your events. Now, if we go back to the other page, you can also see all of the clarifications that we have. We have 6 right now. These may increase as we get closer to competition day. So make sure you're periodically checking these and making sure you read them very carefully because these will supersede the rules that are printed in the rule book on the nationals page. Now we're going to keep going down, and you see there's a few links on the bottom of this page. So these are your primary resources where you're going to see how the track is laid out. We'll also briefly go over a few of these links, but definitely go back and make sure you very thoroughly go through these links yourselves. So let's talk about the vehicle transporter. The vehicle is going to carry the egg. So over here, let me open the second link here. It's called the Scrambler Egg Holder Backdrop Diagram 2023.
So this is the diagram for how the egg has to be carried on the scrambler.
Correct.
Okay.
So this is the Nationals page that they gave us. They forgot that we're scrambling eggs. They thought we were taming gravity. But the diagram itself is correct. So make sure you follow the dimensions. There's a lot here. There's a lot of dimensions here, so we can go through it a little more carefully. So as you're constructing it, make sure you back check and make sure that it fits all of these dimensions on the page. So this green portion right here, if you can see my mouse, that backstop is going to be 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters, and there's a tolerance of 0.5 centimeter. There's no holes on the green block on this side. Notice that this yellow is a dowel that protrudes. So we want this green surface to be flat. That means no holes, no carving out of the backstop. It should be a flat piece. The backstop thickness is listed as 1.1 centimeter or greater. This is from a clarification. So if we go back to the Scrambler webpage here, and we go up here, so rule 3.E, it changed the thickness of the backstop. This is why we're really encouraging students to go back and check the clarifications. So instead of the backstop being 1.27, it is now 1.1 or thicker. So it can be thicker. I would err on the side of thicker and not put it right at 1.1 centimeters as a suggestion.
No. I'm going to just, while you're going back to the other diagram, I'm going to point out that this clarification is not just a VASO clarification. We have adopted a nationals clarification. So if you're competing in any invitationals, anywhere, this is valid and important. It's across the nation that you see this. I'm actually going to point out one other little interesting thing. If any of you are doing bridge, the green backstop, it's the size of a loading block, or at least in terms of its area. So you can see, so, you know, while you're making loading blocks, you can make a scrambler backstop too.
Mm-hmm. And this rule, luckily, because they're making it a smaller thickness or larger, if you had the original 1.27, 1.27 is greater than 1.1. So if you have an old block, it will probably work for this as well. Just make sure you double check and measure it. Because all of these measurements will be done on competition day, and they will affect your scores. All right. Next up are the two dowels, the two yellow circles that I've shown here. So these are two dowels that protrude from the backstop, and it's where the egg is going to sit and rest. So these must extend 3 to 4 centimeters from the backstop. Make sure you're within that range. The bottom of the wooden dowels must be located between 5 and 10 centimeters above the track. So if you see the gradient blue line on the bottom, that represents the track surface, and the dimensions I am talking about is right here. So the navy protrusion on top, if you see this long straight on top of it, that is going to be a wooden dowel. We know that a lot of wood shops, when they sell a 1/4 inch wooden dowels, they're not exactly a 1/4 inch. So make sure you're just relatively close to that 1/4 inch. We don't want any very thick dowels or very thin dowels. Just make sure you're pretty close. And this dowel has to extend at least 20 centimeters above the track surface. So make sure it's high enough as well. These dowels are typically used to time the vehicles on the track. It's a visual indicator, and also we will be using photo gates to measure the speed of your vehicle. So if your vehicle is missing this, it's very hard to time, and it will affect your scoring as well. Back to the thickness about the 1/4 inch dowels. If we go back to the clarification page, it's also detailed here from October 9th, which is what I was talking about, how the 1/4 inch dowels kind of vary in diameter slightly. So as long as you're close, we're going to accept it.
Essentially, just buy something in the store labeled a 1/4 inch dowel.
Yes.
And that'll
also,
be good.
A lot of disposable chopsticks are close. Just measure it if you don't want to spend money. So next up, that's the vehicle backstop. Karen, any anything I missed, or Ethan?
I'm trying to think. I guess we're going to talk about, can we talk about how the egg is attached to it, or did you want to talk about that in a minute?
Sure, we can talk about that. So
Okay.
the egg is going to be resting on the two dowels, correct? And it's actually going to be taped down. For the competition, the egg can't have any tape on the front centimeter and back centimeter.
For people's information, we measured an egg. An egg is roughly 5.5 centimeters in length. So there you go. Now you know the important thing. So you can see how the egg is going to hang off the front of the dowels.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to have 3.5 centimeters of tape. The fatter rounded end of the egg goes against the backstop. That means the pointier part, because an egg isn't, if you look at the bottom, the bottom, I guess, right or left side of your screen, you can see a shape of an egg. The pointy part is going to point forward, and then the flat part is going to be against the backstop. This is also why we don't allow you to drill holes or carve out the backstop, because we're counting it as a flat back, not something holding the egg. The egg must be secured at the frontmost part of the vehicle. This means it also has to be in front of the wheels. So if your wheels protrude before your egg, you're going to have to move the entire apparatus of the backstop holder. And then another clarification from the VASO Scrambler page states that the egg will not be placed inside of a bag. So nothing will be coated on the egg. You can't insert the egg into a Ziploc bag or anything like that.
Okay.
And again, that's another clarification here. Right here, the third one.
All right. Does anybody have any questions about that backstop diagram? There's a lot of fiddly lists and a lot of measurements and a lot of information about how the egg sits on that. Does anyone have anything? Okay, I don't see anything. Right. So I know I interrupted your going around of the various things about the propulsion. What else did you want to tell us about the vehicle?
So another part of the vehicle that is required is the automatic braking system. We do have a wing nut braking system video as a resource. And if you look and see, the wing nut is attached to a threaded screw rod. And as it winds down, this wing nut is going to bump into the rubber washer, and that friction is going to stop the axle. So that's one method of, that's one method of braking the vehicle autonomously. So that means no tethers during competition day. You can't be holding a string, nothing can be tied to the, you can't be holding anything that's connected to the vehicle, and no remote control. We'll talk about that more, but basically nothing electronic is allowed other than the calculator. That includes your phones. So please don't bring your phones, just your calculators.
All right, so it has to have an automatic braking system that's on the vehicle. What else?
Another thing is nothing can touch the floor except for the wheels of the vehicle while on the track. So you can have your energy propulsion system behind the starting track, but as soon as your vehicle touches the track, only wheels are allowed to touch. That means if you have a string braking system, which is another type that you can easily look up online because there's different variations of autonomous braking systems, right? So if you're using a string, that string cannot touch the floor. It must be completely contained within the vehicle. So in general, the vehicle has to move as a whole, and anything falling off or touching the floor, as I was talking about, that is going to be a construction violation that will penalize your final score. Okay.
Well, Ethan will be talking a little bit about braking, in the portion about building and what are some of the options. So, so let's see. So that's the vehicle. So that's the one half of the scrambler that we call the vehicle. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the energy propulsion system. What powers the vehicle?
So energy propulsion system, this is called the scrambler, and the only thing we're using is the changing of the potential and kinetic energy of a falling weight. So this weight cannot exceed 1.5 kilograms, and no additional energy sources are allowed. So no springs, no batteries, no electronics again, and no other energy sources, whether you're winding something or anything like that. So the only thing you're utilizing as energy is the falling of the weight. So be aware, Virginia Science Olympiad will not allow teams to share a propulsion system. So if your school has 3 teams during regionals, you cannot pass that propulsion system around. The main point of that is if one team breaks it, it's not fair for another team to not have a propulsion system to test, right? So we want everyone to bring their own, and everyone can have a fair shot at the competition.
I'm actually going to add to that statement, Rosaline, which
Sure.
is that VASO considers the propulsion. I mean, it is clear in the rules that the propulsion system is part of the scrambler, and teams are to build a scrambler, and that those are intricately linked together, the vehicle and the propulsion system. So we think every team should make their own, that they should not be sharing. It's kind of a theoretical or philosophical idea how we understand what needs to be built as well too. But anyway, but the result is still the same. It can't be shared.
So. Right. And if any teams are looking for clarifications, it's also on the clarification page because the national rulebook says differently. However, for Virginia Science Olympiad, please follow the Virginia Science Olympiad clarifications. So more information about the falling mass, the 1.5 kilograms. If you are attaching the mass with a hook, anything that's falling with the mass is going to be counted towards the weight. So that hook, you will need to weigh that hook as well. So be careful and don't get exactly 1.5 kilograms. There will be a margin of error depending on different scales. So make sure you're slightly underneath the 1.5 kilograms and you should be good. We're not going to be measuring string. So if you're attaching the weight with string, you should be fine. We're not going to calculate how long the string is and how heavy it is, but anything that has significant mass, and that's kind of a judge's call as well, we will be weighing. So another part of this, the weight and hook, if you're using a hook, and if not, you don't have to worry about this, but all the masses have to be detachable for weighing in. And this is how it's going to be impounded at the beginning of the competition. You're not going to tie the weight beforehand. Everything will be taken off and ready to be weighed. Just make sure it's easy to detach and reattach. As soon as the competition begins and you start your time, that's when you may reattach the weight. So make sure it's very easy to attach and detach.
So you're also saying then, just to make sure that I understood this, if you're attaching with something that adds mass to the weight, right? I mean, this is why, because the total weight, not just whatever you call the weight, but the total weight has to be less than 1.5 kilograms. That hook has to be detached also.
Right. So everything that has to be weighed has to be detached.
Okay.
So as soon as the competition starts, the mass cannot contact the floor at any time. So if you're dropping the mass, it cannot hit the floor at the very end. You can stop this by using a pad or cushion or having another item underneath the mass or stopping it early. So this is a lot of explanation of what we expect. However, it's hard to imagine if you don't see it. So I'm going to share a video of an example scrambler. I believe this was 6 years ago. And I'll just play it very quickly. It won't be a long vehicle. So you can see there's an egg on the front part, and there's a backstop with the dowels and the dowel for measurement. The wheels are the only thing touching the floor on the vehicle side, and then there's a string going around. This green item in the back, that is their weight. So go ahead and see how they're doing this. And then you'll see the vehicle brakes on its own. So no tethers, no strings.
Can you go back to the first view of it?
Sure. Give me 1 second.
Because then I was also noting, you were showing a lot of the construction things. I'm also noting that you can see that the rounded end is next to the backstop, the pointy end is to the front, and the tape is just in the middle of the egg. It's not allowed to cushion it in the back or cushion it in the front anywhere. So I also wanted to point that out as well too.
Yep.
Okay.
So this is an example. It's also 6 years ago, so the rules are different. I don't necessarily recommend or dissuade you from following this design. I would encourage you to make your own do your own research and figure out what will work for your team.
Great. Do we have any questions on this part? Not seeing any. Any other construction parameters you'd like to highlight for us?
So there's a lot. So there's two different types of violations: construction and competition violations. So for construction parameters, the entire scrambler, so this includes the egg, the falling mass. So both systems, both components of a system must fit within a box with the base dimensions of 75 by 75 centimeters and 50 centimeters in height. This will be measured, so make sure when your vehicle is in ready to run position, that means your vehicle is all set up and ready to go. All you have to do is release it. That is your dimension that we're measuring. That means if you're doing anything with a ramp, say, and your vehicle starts high, if your wheels are above that 50 centimeter height, that will count as a competition violation. I'm sorry, construction violation. So if you're exceeding the dimensions of this box in any three-dimensional parameter, it will be a construction violation.
So Rosaline, I got a little concerned when you said ramp. You can't use a ramp, right? I mean, that adds additional energy.
It depends on how they're dropping the weight.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're talking about a ramp through that. It
depends on your system.
I see. Right. Okay.
Or even if okay, so if you're building it too close to the parameters, and say you attach one of your corners of your system just slightly off and it skews itself, if it's more trapezoidal than square, then it could push outside of the boundaries as well. So make sure you construct it with a range of variance too. It's better to err on the side of smaller than larger.
Okay. Okay.
And another note, the egg will also count as a dimension. So be careful of the front of the egg as well. You can use a plastic Easter egg as practice, but just make sure you're within tolerance. So the scrambler system must start using a number 2 pencil, and you could see that in the video. Let me skim to that portion where their release mechanism is released by pulling the number 2 pencil. Any part of the pencil may be used. One thing of note is you're not allowed to touch the scrambler when you're releasing it, so it has to be self-standing. So make sure you don't touch it so you can't hold it down. The only thing you're allowed to touch is the number 2 pencil.
That must be a trick, because sometimes I can envision you wanting to like hold the scrambler to pull the number 2 pencil out, and you're saying you can't do even that.
Right, you cannot. So your scrambler system has to be stable enough that it will hold itself if you're pulling it. You can use other parts of the pencil, right? So you can release button lock to release your vehicle. There's various different ways. You don't necessarily have to just pull the pencil out, because that can be a failure point. If you're pulling it out and the entire ramp or structure comes with you, then you'll have an issue with that.
Okay, I think we need to stop with the word ramp.
I'm sorry.
That's, yeah, you did gravity vehicle last year.
That's why I keep using ramp.
So no ramp. Yeah. All righty.
And then back to the electronic devices. No devices except for calculators. This also includes sights. So if you have an electronic sight, that won't be allowed. You'll have to use a manual one.
We have a question at this point, Rosaline.
Okay.
If you have a hook with a launcher, can the hook touch the floor after launching?
I would count that as part of the weight. So I would try not to. You increase the padding or do something different.
Well, I'm trying to understand how the hook would touch the floor without the weight touching the floor. Arnav, do you have some clarity in your question about that? Because I'm not envisioning exactly how that would happen, how the hook would touch the floor without the weight touching the floor. Or do you mean the... Go ahead.
Like if the hook is attached to the car and the car goes out and then the hook is kind of dangling. And then,
that would be a violation. That would be something touching the floor other than the wheels.
Thanks.
So if the hook is on the car, the answer is no. If the hook is on the launcher, it's okay as long as the weight doesn't.
Still not touch the floor because the hook would be weighed in addition to the weight. So it would be a part of the weight in this case.
But I'm thinking in this picture you're showing us, Rosaline, isn't there maybe a hook that's part of holding the vehicle in place, and then after the weight is released, then that string and the parts of the launcher that aren't the weight can touch the floor, right?
So they can touch the floor behind the start line, but as soon as the vehicle crosses the start line, the only thing that can touch are the wheels.
All right. The wheels of the vehicle. Okay.
Yes, the wheels of the vehicle are the only thing.
Arnav, did that answer your question?
Yep.
Great, thanks. Okay. So moving on, I think we were gonna look at the track next, right?
Yes. So again, on this clarification and rule page for Virginia Science Olympiad, if you scroll to the bottom, there's a scrambler track layout. And this is also from Nationals. I don't think there were any typos this time, but I could be wrong. So the start line is going to be at the bottom of your page. You're going to have a 1 meter long piece of tape on the ground with the center point marked. And the center of the track is not going to be taped down, so everything will be measured. However, there won't be a center line tape, all right? You're going to have another tape at 1/4 meter, and the third one at 7.25 meters. So the use of these two pieces of tape is for timing. That's where the timing portion comes in. The timer will start when the vehicle crosses 1/4 meter, and it will end at 7.25 meters. And then finally, the target distance will be at the very end. We're going to be using a door. So it's going to be a very solid piece of wood at the very end, and we're going to mark the center of that door. That center of the door is where we're going to be measuring from when your vehicle brakes. So say your vehicle swerves off to the right and brakes on the right-hand side, the distance that we're going to be measuring is the shortest point between the shortest distance between those 2 points. So there's no X and Y axis, there's no coordinates, everything is the shortest distance between 2 points. So we're likely going to be using photo gates because they're very accurate. We will be having a backup timer just in case. So the photo gates will be lined up with the 1/4 meter and 7.25 meter marks. So that's how we're going to be timing you. If the vehicle hits those photo gates, there's no penalty, but there's no reruns either. So if you hit the photo gates, we're not going to let you restart that run. That's going to count as one of your runs. Wherever your vehicle stops, that's where we're going to be measuring it for. So if you hit the photo gates and we can't determine your time anymore, we will have an in-person timer as a backup, and we'll be using their time instead. Are there any questions about the track of how this works?
We will be putting the photo gates as far apart as we can. It really just depends on where we're running. If we're in a hallway or a gym floor or a cafeteria, how much space we have.
Right. Ideally, your vehicle should not be swerving that far off to one side or another because it's a very straight track. There's no curvature in this competition.
All right. Thank you, Rosaline. Did you want to take a brief moment and talk about the impound and practice logs as well, too?
Sure. So this year we do have impound for our vehicles, and one of the largest challenges we've seen is the struggle for students to impound their practice logs with all of the information included. So make sure you read through the rules and like nitpick exactly what you need as part of your logs. So impound will include the scrambler system, so both the vehicle and then the energy source or the energy propulsion system. And then remember to include the detached mass. So remember to detach the mass and have it on the side and have it ready to be weighed. Any alignment devices you're going to be using, any tools, any spare parts, tape, glue, and this includes any instruments that you want to use during the actual testing. If you want to bring your own, not stopwatch, but if you want to bring your own ruler, unless you have a mechanical stopwatch, you can bring a ruler, you can bring a tape measure, whatever you need, make sure you bring that with you. We're not going to allow students to go back and bring their own items when they're getting ready to run. The exception to this is the safety glasses and calculator. Those are the two things you're allowed to bring. Finally, the practice log and design logs. That's two different logs this time. They can be combined into one, but there's two significant portions of this logs that we want to see. So your practice and design log, it must include a cover page, and it has to have your team and whoever's competing, their informations. So make sure you check the rule book. It'll tell you exactly what you need. So the practice log must include data for 4 or more parameters for 10 or more runs. So practice logs is basically, we want to see that you've tested the vehicle before and you know ideally how far your vehicle will go, how it's going to brake, how far off of the goal that your vehicle will likely go. And so the 3 of the parameters that are required of the 4 include target distance when you're doing your practice runs, the vehicle's actual distance. So say you're aiming for 8 meters, but your vehicle goes 7.5. You want to see both of those numbers. The time it took for that vehicle to get there, not necessarily the quarter of a meter to 7.25, just the general timing, so you have an idea of how fast your vehicle is. Those are the basic 3. The last log parameter is up to you. If you're doing the wing nut braking system that we had showed earlier, you can add that in. You can add different weights if you're experimenting with different amounts of weights under 1.5, and any other changes or notes that you have. That's the practice log. So the second part is the design log. So you have to specify what materials you used, a description of how the scrambler was constructed, and if there's any 3D printing, laser cutting, use of CNC machines or any like similar manufacturing systems or tools that were used, we want to know about that too. There's special rules that go with the 3D printing, laser cutting, and CNC machines. Basically, if the scrambler is created with anything related to the special manufacturing, we want more information about how you came up with this design and if you use a pre-existing design. There is a very strict kit rule or that we have. Basically, if you're using a kit or any designs from online that you have to adjust it significantly for your team's use. So that doesn't mean you can drill an extra hole and call it, oh, that's our significant change. We want to see that students have learned exactly how this works and how you can make it better. We won't be accepting any basic kits that are going to be used. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Let's talk about the scoring. I know that there's actually a couple little hidden things here in the scoring that I'd like us to make sure that we have a chance to highlight for people. So how is this event scored?
So it's kind of like golf, the lowest score wins. So the closer you are to target and the faster your vehicle is. The more important variable in this case is the distance you are from the final point. So I would aim to be more accurate than fast. So the final score is you're going to have 2 runs during your competition within 8 minutes. The better of the 2 runs is going to be your best run. So that's how you're going to be ranked. Any final score penalties will be added to that and will populate the rankings at the very end to post the scores. When you're competing, if you ask us how you're doing, we won't be able to answer you because we don't know how many teams have gone and how many teams will show up. So that's something that we can't tell you. What you can do is time it yourself or measure how far your vehicle distance is. Account for any construction or any violations in general, or whether it's competition or construction, and you can calculate that score on your own. While you're doing your practice logs, you can also practice doing that if you so choose.
I'm going to amend something you said here, Rosalie,
Sure.
which is that you'll give them that information about how that happened at the tournament. They cannot time it themselves because timing requires an electronic device typically.
That's true.
But you will give them all the parameters of the distance and the time and whatnot, and then they can take that and at least have that information. So,
yes.
Yes. All right. So the run score, pardon?
I have had students measure it themselves because they just want to verify the scores that the judges have seen as a note. Sorry, go ahead.
So the run score, what comprises the run score for a run?
A run score is the distance plus time score and any run penalties. So the distance is measured from the top of the egg, not the dowel in this case. That's the very front of the egg to the target, which is the center of the barrier. That's how many, we're going to be measuring that in centimeters. So that's how many points you would get in that case. Any failed runs, so say your vehicle brakes way too early and doesn't even get anywhere close to the barrier, or it falls apart, or something horrendous happens and you're not able to run. A failed run is 1,100 points, so that's a significant amount. You don't want to fail your run, but you get a second try, right? So if you fail your first one, don't worry about it. Just do your best on your second run. The second part of this is the timing. So the run time is measured in seconds. It begins when the dowel passes the 1/4 meter mark and it ends at the 7 1/4 meter mark. Whatever the recorded time is in seconds, it's going to be multiplied by 2. That will be added to your distance score. If the vehicle fails to run or pass the 1/4 mark but stops before the 7.25 meter line, it's going to be recorded as 0 seconds and it'll have a competition violation. So even though your time score is 0, which is very low, you're still going to have the competition violation, which will push the score back up. And again, lowest score wins, so you want as low as possible. So the penalties I'm talking about, competition violations are 150 points. Construction violations are 300 points per violation. So that it can actually add up. If your dowel's off, if the backstop is constructed incorrectly, and in addition to that, another construction violation is incurred, that's going to add up very quickly. So make sure you follow the rules and be very careful in your construction. In the case of the egg,
breaking the egg, yes, breaking the egg.
So if you break your egg on the first run, you don't get a second run. That egg is already broken. Each team will only have 1 egg per their competition. So because it's a competition violation, if you break the egg, that's 150 points. So in general, be more conservative with your first run. Don't go all aggressive and try to get right up to the barrier. Be careful on the first one and then take your time and readjust your vehicle to get closer on the second run. That's what we recommend. Also, if you break the egg and the vehicle touches the barrier, that's going to count as 2 competition violations.
Yep.
Okay. So back to the practice logs. Incomplete practice logs and design logs are 25 points each. So if you don't have a practice log, that's 25 points. If you don't have any information about design logs, that's another 25 points. So that's 50 points each if you're missing information from the practice logs. If you're not impounding anything, that's 150 points. So make sure you impound something. If the scrambler device isn't impounded, that's 5,000 points. So you're welcome to, if you're running late, you're welcome to compete. However, you will get 5,000 points added to your final score. So make sure you pay attention to when the impound starts, when it ends, and have all of your materials ready to go.
That is a considerable, I'm amazed by the size of that penalty. Impound is a very serious issue in this event, isn't it? But there's a lot you're going to have to measure too, which is why you need it.
It's very important also because we don't release the target distance until everything is impounded. So there's also a variance. And we don't want teams to be able to have an unfair advantage and be able to prepare for the target distance with their vehicle on the side. We want all of the vehicles to be within the competition impound, so no adjustments can be made until the competition begins.
Great. And then what are the tiebreakers for Scrambler? So
in the rare case that we have ties, because it's very difficult to tie in a distance and timing competition, the better vehicle distance will win. That's the first tiebreaker. So again, distance is your accuracy, and distance is your primary objective, to be as straight as possible and as close to the target as possible. The second tiebreaker, if magically everything lines up to be the same, is the lower time score. Finally, if you have a nearly identical run to the other group, whichever group scored the better vehicle distance on the second recorded run, so the non-recorded, whichever one was not the best run, that's going to win. It is very, I don't know if I've ever had a tiebreaker to the third tier. I think I've done the better vehicle distance once, and I've been in ES for several years now. It's very, very rare.
Okay. Any questions on the scoring, anyone? I don't see anything coming in. Thank you, Rosalie. Let's turn now to just building these puppies. And I'm going to turn now to Ethan and ask you a few questions. So Ethan, can you go into a little bit more detail about braking systems for us? Because I know that that's one of the trickiest things, making a brake well.
Yeah, for sure. So Rosalie already showed that video of a wingnut braking system. Maybe I'll pull up that same video again, just so we can take another look at it. Give me 1 second. So just to go over a few more of the details of how that's working, we have a threaded axle, this like threaded dowel going down the width of the car, and we have this wooden bar in place. And in this case, you can see that the team has either gotten a one-sided wing nut or removed one side of the wing nut. You don't have to do that. You could use a two-sided wing nut. The idea is that every time the wheels rotate, this wing nut will be sort of unscrewing itself along that axle, and the wing nut is unable to turn with the axle because that wooden bar is in place preventing it. And so when the wing nut eventually reaches the end of the axle, it will jerk to a stop and stop the axle from turning. One sort of important thing to think about with your braking system is how suddenly you're braking. So in general, if you want a car to be precise and to be able to go a very specific distance, you don't want the car to be skidding at the end, right? Because if the wheels stop turning, but then the car skids further, then the egg could still end up hitting the wall, even if the car stopped before the wall. So there are a few ways that you can address this. One thing to think about is adding some cushioning to this axle so that when the wing nut reaches the end of the dowel, it doesn't jerk to a sudden stop, but maybe you have like a spring around the axle that provides a little bit of extra cushioning. You can also do things like adjusting the weight of your car or using different wheels, and that'll help out as well. And there may also be other braking systems that work, but I think most of the successful vehicles that I've seen in the past have always used wing nut braking systems.
That's interesting with the idea of the spring or the little piece in there. I'm not sure I had seen how many. So you might have the vehicle. So the vehicle might have. Would the vehicle then have some recoil or go backwards a little bit at all, or does that
probably
happen?
not. This is sort of a newer thing that I learned that some teams might try. But the idea is to try and slow the car down as it's approaching its target point. So instead of the car going really, really fast and coming to a very, very sudden stop, it'll sort of go very fast and then slow down a little bit more gradually. Certainly, there are lots of very successful teams that don't do that, so don't feel like you have to do that. I was just thinking about how your car is going to behave after the wing nut reaches the end of the axle and it comes to a sudden stop, and how you can try and reduce skidding is definitely something you should think about.
And I'm thinking about the fact that we've got like this egg in the front, barreling down at a door. You know, I can see it's so Rosalie, it's okay if the egg touches the barrier. It's just if the egg smashes and the vehicle touches the barrier where there's the penalties, right? But the egg itself, it's okay if it touches the barrier as long as it doesn't break?
Yes, as long as it doesn't break.
Okay. So yeah, I can see you wanting to kind of coast it. Just gently tap the egg on the
You're going to have to be very gentle.
Yeah, I wouldn't aim for that necessarily.
Okay.
I wouldn't
that'll
either.
be.
In my head that works, but obviously it's not a good. All right. Thank you. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about braking?
I don't really think so. I think that's about it. Yeah.
Let's talk about good wheels, because wheels are an issue then. You mentioned the wheels somewhat as you talked about the behavior and the skidding. So what can you tell us about that?
Right. So I think in sourcing good wheels, there are a few things you want to think about. One of them is wheel size. Obviously, you can use really big wheels or you can use really small wheels. You'll see a lot of teams end up using CDs as their wheels because it's just sort of like a round object that's easy to source from most people's homes. Those can work. I've seen successful cars that have used CDs, but they're definitely not, they have some drawbacks to them. For one thing, they're a very specific size. They are generally, they're pretty large. I think they're larger than a lot of wheels that people would go for. And so if you're looking for a wheel of a different size, go for something else. They're also very, very thin, which can make it hard to get them to be sort of stable. You don't want your wheels to be wobbling as the car moves. You also want the wheels to be perpendicular to the floor, right? You don't want a wheel that's sort of at an angle, and then ends up wobbling as it rolls. And so with CDs, that can be difficult because they're so thin. It can be hard to mount them on an axle in such a way that they're perfectly straight. You also want to make sure that your wheels have good grip on the floor. So usually you want some sort of rubber material. If you're using something like a CD, which has like a slick, smooth edge, you could wrap it in something like a rubber band or a balloon to provide it a little bit more traction. You can also go out and buy wheels. There's a particular wheel manufacturer that a lot of teams end up using called Banebots. If you Google it, it's BANEBOTS. I can send it in the Zoom chat, perhaps, for people who are here. And if you Google Banebots wheels, they manufacture a few different types of wheels with different levels of grippiness. So some of them have like a softer rubber that's a little bit more grippy, and others have a tougher rubber that's less grippy. That sort of ties into the idea of vehicle weight, where if you have a heavier car, you might go with a harder wheel, whereas if you have a lighter weight car, you might go with a softer, grippier wheel because there isn't as much weight to sort of push the car into the floor and give it that extra grip. And so you want to benefit from a softer wheel. But you certainly don't have to use Banebots wheels. They're a little bit expensive. You can source wheels from different places. You can use found objects around your home to make wheels. You can 3D print wheels or make wheels out of wood on a lathe or something like that if you have access to those kinds of tools. So there are definitely lots of options. Don't feel like you have to go with any particular one.
You brought up a topic that I wanted to ask because you were talking about heavier or lighter cars. Do you have a sense, is there a benefit to one or the other, having a heavier or a lighter car?
This feels to me like an event where probably a lighter car is going to be advantageous for a couple of reasons. Number one, you want the car to be able to stop very precisely. And if you have a lighter weight car, it's going to have less inertia, and that's going to make it easier to stop. And it's also going to make the car less likely to skid probably after it stops, because it's going to have less momentum following through. The downside to a lighter car is that it's not going to be as strong, right? So you want to make sure that your car isn't going to fall apart. You want to make sure that your car is very sturdy, and that it doesn't bend in ways that are going to cause it to not move in a straight line, because traveling straight is very important. Also, having some inertia behind your car can be an advantage. You don't want your car to be so lightweight that like air resistance starts to play a role, and then the car slows down after it starts moving. You want the car to be able to reach the end of the track and still have some speed left. So take these things into account, but I also encourage you to experiment. You can build a car and then you can try adding and removing weight from it and see how it affects the car's speed and how it affects how accurately the car is able to stop, and see what works best for you.
Good, great, thank you. So Rosaline did mention the thing about kits a little bit, and about the need to have a significant modification to a kit that you might purchase, that VASO looks for that. Can you say a few words to add on to what she said about that?
Yeah, sure. So there are definitely a lot of kits out there that you can look for, and some of them are pretty good.
Some of them aren't too.
Yeah, some of them aren't too. They're definitely, yeah. Definitely sort of the spirit of this rule that we're going for is that we want, if you do choose to use a kit, which we are not encouraging you to do, but if you do choose to use a kit, we want to see that you have made changes to that kit that indicate an intentional design decision. In other words, any change that you have made to your vehicle or made to your kit needs to be motivated by some reasoning of why you think that will make the car, perform better. So examples of things that would not qualify as, significant functional changes would be like swapping out one part of the car for an essentially equivalent part, or just sort of adding in a single part that was missing from the kit, especially if it's a non-functional part like a dowel. Like you don't want to get a kit that doesn't have a dowel and attach your own dowel and say that is now a modification. It has to be some intentional design decision where you feel that you have improved the kit by adding or removing or changing some part of it. And it's probably best if you document that reasoning in your design log that you're going to be submitting. So you want your design log to show the process that you use to build your kit and provide information about it. And any changes that you've made should be justified in writing in your design log.
Thank you. Where do people go wrong in the building? Just in general, some tips.
Yeah, so definitely make sure you hit your construction parameters. It's a little bit frustrating as an event supervisor to have a team show up with what's a very, very good vehicle, which just misses one design parameter a little bit, and all of a sudden they get docked a ton of points. So, in some ways you can think of the, just meeting the design specifications as sort of like free points. Make sure that your dowel is the right length. Make sure that your entire thing fits inside of the dimensions that's specified. Make sure you aren't using any materials you're not allowed to use. Make sure that in your testing, you're paying attention to all of the different potential competition violations, and make sure that you're not accidentally violating any of them. No matter how good your car is, if you hit a competition violation or a construction violation, that can be really bad for your score. So be careful about that stuff. You also really want to make sure that you have a stable, balanced car that's able to drive in a straight line. Rosaline talked about how the scoring is measured from the center line or center point on the wall to the car. So even if you're able to get very, very close to the wall, if the car is sort of way off to one side because it curved, you're not going to score very well. But if you're able to make your car very consistent, have it travel in a straight line down the middle, then even if you're a little ways away from the wall when you stop, you'll still get a pretty good score. And then finally, the biggest sort of overall thing is just start as early as you can and do as much testing as you can. Even the best car in the world in the hands of someone who hasn't tested it before and doesn't really know how it works is not going to perform very well. So all the testing you do is not only good for collecting data about how your car works and understanding like how to operate it, it's also really good practice so that when you get to the competition, you know exactly what to do at what time, and you're just sort of going through the motions.
I'm going to add one other little point to this that is something that I remember from many years ago, is weighing your mass carefully. And also, again, as Rosaline talked about in some detail, making sure you're aware of all the pieces that add weight to the mass, because all of that gets weighed together. But I remember a few years ago, I think when the weight could be 2 kilograms, a team went out and they bought something labeled a 2 kilogram mass. And they never massed it. They brought it to tournament and it weighed 2.1 kilograms. So it's, and it was devastating. But I mean, you know, the maker of the mask thought it just needed to be at least 2 kilograms and highlighted it as such. But we had, you know, our regulation was at most. So if you buy something that's labeled, still check it, measure it, weigh it. Always. And even with 3D printed things, 3D printers are not magic. They have lips. They, you know, just because you typed in a measurement, you better check it also, because I've seen 3D printed things not be to spec either. All right. Would you like to? Yeah, I know you wanted to take a second and address SciOLi.
Yeah, sure. So many of you may be aware already, but there's a website that's linked from the VASO page for all events, and definitely for this event called scioli.org, which is an online forum where Science Olympiad competitors from all over the country go to collaborate and answer questions and talk about design decisions that they've made and discuss strategy for different events. And so I know that when I was a competitor, I really loved SciOLi because it was really great for getting ideas. And it was also really good for figuring out how to address problems that I've been stuck on. And you can also post your own questions there, right? If you encounter some design flaw that you just don't know how to address, or you're consistently running into the same problem, you know, post a question and there's lots of people who will be, you know, enthusiastic to answer it. You know, Science Olympiad is a competition, but it's also very much about collaboration and working with others. And I think it's really cool that we have this online space where people get very passionate about the events they participate in. So definitely check that out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ethan. Let's have just 1 minute on the couple of tips of how students goof. We've talked a lot about impound. Do not miss impound. It's a huge penalty. Rosalie told us that. But yeah. Any other couple of tips for how students goof on tournament day?
Right. So there's this rule about not rolling their vehicle on the track on competition day. That means a couple of things. That means you're not allowed to like test out the track before you arrive to compete. It also means that during your actual run, you're not allowed to take your car and sort of push it up and down the track. The reason for this, as Karen pointed out to me about a month ago, was that if you were allowed to do this, you could do a single run and then go get your car. But instead of picking up your car and carrying it back, you could actually roll it along the track on the way back. And if you're using a wing nut braking system, what that would do is position the wing nut in exactly the position that it needed to be to get the correct distance. So you're not allowed to do that. Make sure that if you're using a wing nut braking system, that you're setting up your wing nut at its initial position based on testing that you've done beforehand, and that you have data about where the wing nut has to be in order for the car to travel a particular distance. Another big thing is make sure you're waiting for the event supervisor to finish measuring and to let you go pick up your car before you do. So sometimes competitors will be kind of nervous and excited, and they'll complete a run and they'll immediately run after their car to pick it up to start their next run. And you want to make sure you don't do that, because that will be a rules violation. You need to make sure the event supervisors have enough time to finish measuring. And if you're worried about running out of time to complete your runs, don't be. The event supervisor should pause the timer while they're completing those measurements. So you won't actually be losing out on time if they're measuring slowly or something.
Well, the good news, this is a high school event. It's the middle schoolers that get really excited and want to run after their vehicle. So I know none of you out there will do that. I think we've come to the end of everything we wanted to say. I'm going to give it just a few seconds to see if anybody has any questions they'd like to add. Rosaline and Ethan, thank you so very, very much for your time today. This was invaluable, and I know that everybody is really grateful to have had the chance to listen to your words of wisdom. We'll see everybody at tournament. Have a good holiday.